This is a story about the gold rush that took place in Nome, Alaska. Like my Dawson City video that was uploaded a few weeks ago, this video also has a lot of great pictures. As always, if there are any photographs left over after the story, I'll put them all in a slideshow at the end of this video. I'll also leave a link to the Dawson City video at the end, as well as a link in the description box below for those who haven't seen that video. It was back in 1898 that three prospectors, Jaffe Lindeberg, Eric Lindblom, and John Bryntesen, found gold on Anvil Creek. These three men became known as the Lucky Swedes, and their gold find sparked a stampede from the fading Klondike to the shores of Nome along the Bering Sea. It didn't take long for news of this strike to get out either. By the following spring, miners, prospectors, and everyone else who wanted to make a quick buck was on their way headed north. Most stampeders reached Nome by sea. Spring and early summer steamships sailed from Seattle and San Francisco, bringing thousands of people and supplies. However, it is estimated that in 1899, as many as 8,000 people left Dawson City in a single week and headed to Nome to try their luck. Being as Dawson City is around 800 miles from Nome, the folks from the Yukon took riverboats down the Yukon River to St. Michael, then steamships along the coast to Nome. Back then, there was no harbor at Nome. Steamships anchored offshore. Passengers, freight, and even horses were loaded into small surfboats, or, when pack ice lingered, offloaded onto the ice and brought to shore by dog teams. By 1901, a loading crane was built, and by 1905, a wharf and cable tramway improved the transfer of cargo, but during the early rush, the sight of ships riding at anchor and long lines of boats coming to shore defined Nome's waterfront. Initially, Nome had very little to offer. So, where did supplies come from? Practically everything. Lumber, flour, mining gear, tents, you name it, was all purchased in Seattle and San Francisco, then loaded aboard steamers and sent north. Nome mushroomed overnight. The official U.S. Census counted 12,488 residents in 1900, making it the largest town in Alaska. Contemporary estimates suggest the summer population swelled to roughly 20,000 when the fleet arrived. However, by 1910, after the easy gold was gone, those numbers plunged back to only a few thousand. Nome's district became one of the great gold producers of the far north. Over time, the Nome district yielded on the order of 3.5 to 4 million ounces of gold. 1906 stood out as being the single most productive year with more than 295,000 ounces. The extraordinary piece of the story is how much of that early gold came from simple rocker boxes and sluices right on the beach. At the peak of the rush, Front Street became a board-planked bazaar of tents, shacks, and two-story false fronts. Accounts describe upward of 100 saloons, plus dozens of restaurants, stores, and hotels. Many of these hotels were just canvas tents with bunks, electric lights, newspapers, a hospital, churches, and a post office were all built with astonishing speed. At the very start of the rush, however, people lived in canvas tents. Thousands of tents lined the coastline that ran for miles. Tents could be seen as far as the eye could see. Merchants thrived by mining the miners. Outfitters and freight firms floated goods from ship to shore. Laundries, bathhouses, and general stores did brisk business. Photographers documented it all, and newspapers fed the insatiable appetite for news and rumor. Piles of crates of supplies lined the beach. You could see signboards for laundries and mercantile houses almost everywhere you walked. Saloons, gambling joints, and brothels were also big business. The most famous business was the Dexter Saloon, opened in 1899 by Wyatt Earp and partner Charles Hoxie. It was the first two-story wooden building in town and a magnet for high-rolling poker, fancy cigars, and expensive whiskey. Wyatt sold out after a couple of seasons with a small fortune and left before the town cooled. Like most of these old towns we read about, fires did their fair share of damage in Nome. Canvas tents and wooden structures were a recipe for disaster, and fires were quite common. The 1934 fire was the most catastrophic, leveling almost all of the Gold Rush-era architecture and reshaping the town's identity. Earlier fires, like in 1925, also caused significant loss. Nome also experienced a violent storm that pretty much wrecked the town. On October 5, 1913, a fierce storm struck Nome from the southeast. This powerful storm unleashed gale-force winds exceeding 60 miles per hour and generated waves 40 feet high, along with a massive 20-foot storm surge that washed over the city's protective barriers. The entire sand spit, which housed hundreds of homes, was completely washed away. It is said that there were 500 people who were left homeless and forced to flee inland to higher ground. A large portion of the town's buildings were swept out to sea. Nome's rush brought fortune seekers and predators alike. The most infamous conflict was less a gunfight than a courtroom heist, the Nome gold stealing scandal. North Dakota political boss Alexander McKenzie, working with newly appointed federal judge Arthur Noyes, used fraudulent injunctions and a receivership to seize rich claims from their owners and work them under his control. This all worked well until the Ninth Circuit stepped in and McKenzie landed in jail for contempt. Brawls and occasional shootings certainly erupted in a town with scores of saloons, but Nome's most famous gunfighter, Wyatt Earp, kept to the saloon trade here rather than law work. Surviving accounts focus less on street duels and more on gambling dust-ups and claim jumpers. This all made steady work of federal troops and marshals trying to keep order. Nome at that time was under U.S. federal jurisdiction. The town had marshals, but a stampede of over 20,000 people in 1900 overwhelmed them, so the army troops were sometimes called in to maintain order, especially when drunken crowds got out of hand. The Nome Nugget newspaper archives also talks about a couple of shootings. In the summer of 1900, a man was shot and killed outside a saloon after a gambling quarrel. That same year, there was another case where two prospectors were firing on each other over a woman in a dance hall. When you look at Nome on a map, it's way out in the middle of nowhere. No roads in and no roads out, but believe it or not, Nome even had a railroad. The first train track in Nome was built in 1900 by the Wild Goose Mining and Trading Company. This short-haul narrow-gauge line was built to haul freight and mining supplies serving the local gold fields. By 1906, there were roughly 30 miles of track that ran out to Anvil Creek and other camps. By 1906, fresh strikes on second and third beaches prolonged the boom. And like the Klondike, it didn't take long until the dredges moved in. Production remained significant for decades. The last of the big historic dredges didn't shut down until the mid-20th century. In about 1920, the gold started to run out, and the population really started to drop as people moved on. The amount of gold that had been mined in the Nome district is at least 3.6 million ounces. Remember the three Swedes that started the rush? Well, it is said they yielded at least $1 million in the first year and eventually over 10 million total. Some say they mined 500,000 ounces of gold. While they didn't pocket every ounce, the strike launched fortunes that made each of them wealthy men for life. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I have a slideshow of extra photographs with a brief description. I hope you enjoy. You can still go to the town of Nome today. The fastest way there is by air. Miners still head north in the summer and mine the beaches of Nome. Larger outfits dredge the floor of the Bering Sea. I think both Nome and Dawson City should be on any prospector's bucket list as a place to visit at least once in their life. Well, I would like to thank you all for watching today. If you enjoyed this story about Nome, be sure to watch my story on Dawson City coming up next, and I'll see you all in the next video.